It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the city was alive with the hum of everyday life. JD Vance, the best-selling author of Hillbilly Elegy and now a prominent political figure, had just finished a town hall meeting. He was tired but energized by the conversations he'd had with constituents. As he walked down the bustling street, his stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since breakfast. Spotting a small, cozy diner tucked between two buildings, he decided to grab a quick bite before heading home. The diner, Maggie's Corner, was the kind of place that felt like stepping back in time. The red vinyl booths, the checkered floors, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee gave it a warm, welcoming vibe. JD walked in, took off his coat, and sat down at a booth near the window. He glanced at the menu, already craving a classic cheeseburger and fries. A few minutes passed and no one came to take his order. He looked around, noticing that the other tables were being served promptly. Finally, a young waitress named Emily approached him. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with her notepad. "I'm sorry, sir," she said hesitantly, "but we can't serve you here." JD was taken aback. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice calm but puzzled. Emily glanced over her shoulder, as if looking for backup. "It's just, well, the owner said we can't serve you. He said he doesn't agree with your politics." JD leaned back in his seat, processing what he just heard. He had faced criticism before, plenty of it, but being denied service at a diner was a first. He could feel the eyes of other customers on him, some curious, others whispering among themselves. For a moment he considered leaving. It would be easy to walk out, find another place to eat, and forget about the whole thing. But something inside him told him to stay. This wasn't just about a meal, it was about something bigger. "Could I speak to the owner, please?" JD asked politely. Emily hesitated but nodded. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with a burly man in his late 50s. His name tag read Frank. He crossed his arms and stood by the table, his expression stern. "Look, Mr. Vance," Frank began, "I don't want any trouble, but this is my place, and I have the right to serve who I want. I don't agree with your views, and I don't want you here." JD took a deep breath. He could feel the tension in the air, but he remained calm. "Frank, I respect that this is your business," he said, "and I respect that we have different opinions. But I'd like to ask you something. Have we ever sat down and had a real conversation? Have we ever tried to understand each other's perspectives?" Frank frowned, caught off guard by the question. "What's there to understand? You're on one side, I'm on the other. End of story." JD shook his head. "It doesn't have to be that way. I didn't come here to argue or make a scene. I came here because I was hungry and thought this looked like a nice place to eat. But maybe this is an opportunity for both of us." Frank raised an eyebrow. "An opportunity for what?" "To talk," JD said simply. "To listen. To find common ground. I'm not asking you to agree with me, Frank. I'm just asking you to give me a chance." The diner had gone quiet. Everyone was watching the exchange, captivated by the unexpected turn of events. Even Emily stood frozen, her notepad still in hand. Frank hesitated, his tough exterior wavering. Finally, he let out a sigh. "All right," he said. "You want to talk? Let's talk, but you're buying your own meal." JD smiled. "Fair enough." Frank sat down across from JD, and the two men began to talk. At first, the conversation was tense, with both men sticking to their positions. But as the minutes turned into an hour, something remarkable happened. They started to listen to each other. They talked about their families, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. They discovered that, despite their differences, they had more in common than they thought. The other customers watched in awe as the two men laughed, debated, and even found moments of agreement. By the time JD finished his cheeseburger, the atmosphere in the diner had completely changed. What had started as a confrontation had turned into a moment of connection. As JD stood up to leave, Frank extended his hand. "You're all right, Vance," he said. "I still don't agree with everything you say, but I respect you. You're welcome here anytime." JD shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Frank. That means a lot." As he walked out of the diner, JD couldn't help but smile. The experience had reminded him of why he'd entered public life in the first place, not to divide, but to bridge gaps, to remind people that no matter how different we may seem, we're all human. And sometimes all it takes is a little conversation to change everything. Word of the encounter spread quickly, and soon the story of JD Vance and Frank's Diner was all over the news. People were inspired by the message of unity and understanding. Maggie's Corner became a symbol of hope, a place where people from all walks of life could come together and find common ground. And as for JD, he continued his work, carrying the lesson of that day with him. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply sit down, listen, and share a meal.